I know this because Ben told me about your conversation with him, and because I spent the last 3 years tracking down everyone who was involved in the mission planning process. The revelation that Sarah had been conducting her own investigation sent a chill through the room, making it clear that this confrontation was not the result of a chance encounter, but the culmination of a carefully planned campaign for justice. The implications of Sarah's investigation began to sink in, as the officers realized that she had been working as a custodian on the base, not out of necessity, but as part of a deliberate plan to gather evidence and confront the man responsible for her teammates' deaths. I needed to know the truth about what happened to my team. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength as she revealed the full scope of her 3-year mission. I needed to understand how a routine intelligence gathering operation could go so catastrophically wrong, and I needed to make sure that the men who died received the justice they deserved. She looked around the room at the other officers, making eye contact with each one as if measuring their character and finding them wanting. Most of all, I needed to look into the eyes of the man who killed my brothers and make sure he understood the full cost of his ambition. What would Sarah do now that the truth had finally been revealed, and how would Major Cole face the consequences of his actions? BD Stories reveals the most unexpected plot twists. What do you think Sarah will do next? The news of Major Cole's disgrace spread through Fort Bragg like wildfire, carried by whispered conversations in mess halls and official channels that moved with the relentless efficiency of military bureaucracy. Within 72 hours of Sarah's revelation, Cole found himself stripped of his command and confined to quarters pending a full investigation by the Inspector General's office. His once immaculate service record was now under microscopic review, with investigators examining every decision he had made throughout his career for signs of the moral corruption that had led to the deaths of 5 elite soldiers. The base that had once respected his authority now regarded him with a mixture of disgust and pity as word spread about his responsibility for a tragedy that had been officially classified as an unavoidable operational loss. Sarah returned to her custodial duties as if nothing had changed her movements through the base corridors, carrying the same invisible quality that had allowed her to observe and gather information for 3 years. But those who knew the truth could see the subtle differences in her bearing, the way she held her shoulders straighter, the confidence in her stride that spoke of a burden finally lifted. She had accomplished what she set out to do, but the victory felt hollow in a way that she hadn't anticipated. Justice was not the same thing as satisfaction, and the knowledge that Ben and his teammates were still dead left her feeling empty rather than vindicated. The weight of carrying their memory had become such a fundamental part of her identity that she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be now that the truth had finally been revealed. 3 weeks after Cole's arrest, Sarah received an unexpected summons to report to the office of Brigadier General Harrison, the commanding officer of Fort Bragg, and a man whose reputation for integrity was matched only by his intolerance for officers who betrayed the trust placed in them. She had never spoken to the general directly, but she knew that he had been following the investigation closely and had personally ordered the comprehensive review of Cole's service record that was likely to result in a court-martial and possible criminal charges. The general's office was located on the top floor of the base's administrative building, a space that reflected both the power and responsibility of his position through its Spartan furnishings and walls lined with photographs documenting decades of military service. General Harrison was a compact man in his early 60s, his gray hair cut in the regulation style that he had maintained since his days as a young lieutenant, and his weathered face bore the lines that came from years of making decisions that affected the lives of thousands of people. He gestured for Sarah to take a seat in one of the leather chairs positioned in front of his desk, his manner respectful in a way that acknowledged both her service record and her recent actions in exposing Cole's crimes. "Miss Mitchell," he began, using her civilian name, but with a tone that suggested he was fully aware of her military background and accomplishments. "I've been reviewing your service record, and I have to say that your decision to leave the Navy represents a significant loss to our special operations community." Sarah remained silent as the general continued, unsure of where the conversation was leading, but prepared for the possibility that her actions might have consequences she hadn't anticipated. "Your performance evaluations were consistently outstanding. Your psychological profiles indicated exceptional stability under stress, and your training scores placed you in the top 5% of all special operations personnel," General Harrison said, reading from a file that Sarah recognized as her complete military service record. "According to your former commanding officers, you were being considered for promotion to senior non-commissioned officer rank and possible selection for advanced leadership training." The general closed the file and looked directly at Sarah, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "I'm offering you the opportunity to return to active duty with a full restoration of rank and privileges." General Harrison said, the words hanging in the air between them, like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. "More specifically, I'm offering you the chance to lead the military's first comprehensive training program for female special operations candidates." The proposal was so unexpected that Sarah found herself speechless for several moments, her mind struggling to process the implications of what the general was suggesting. A return to active duty would mean leaving behind the civilian life she had built, but it would also represent an opportunity to ensure that future generations of female soldiers would have opportunities that had been denied to previous generations. Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out more hesitant than she would have liked. "General, I appreciate the offer, but I have one condition that might make my return to service impossible," she said, her words carefully chosen to avoid any appearance of insubordination while still making her position clear. General Harrison raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the idea that someone in Sarah's position would attempt to negotiate terms with a general officer. "I want Major Cole to serve as my assistant instructor for the program," Sarah said, the words causing the general's expression to shift from intrigue to outright confusion. "I want him to learn what honor actually means by serving under the command of people he once considered inferior." The general's reaction was exactly what Sarah had expected, a mixture of shock, confusion, and concern for her mental state that was clearly visible on his weathered face. "Miss Mitchell, I'm not sure I understand your request," he said carefully, his tone suggesting that he was beginning to question whether the stress of her 3-year investigation had affected her judgment. "Major Cole is facing court-martial proceedings that will likely result in a dishonorable discharge and possible imprisonment. He's not exactly the kind of person we want associated with a prestigious new training program." But Sarah had spent months thinking about this moment, considering not just what justice would look like, but what redemption might require for both herself and the man who had destroyed her team. "General, with respect, revenge is easy," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength as she articulated thoughts that she had been forming for months. "I could have exposed Major Cole's crimes in a way that destroyed him completely, and I would have been justified in doing so. But destroying him wouldn't bring back Ben or the others, and it wouldn't prevent future tragedies caused by officers who prioritize their careers over their responsibilities." She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I want Major Cole to spend the rest of his career learning what it means to serve something larger than himself. I want him to understand that true leadership comes from sacrifice, not from the willingness to sacrifice others." General Harrison listened in fascination as Sarah outlined her vision for Cole's rehabilitation, her words revealing a depth of thought and moral complexity that impressed him despite his reservations about the practical implications of her proposal. "I want him to start at the bottom and work his way up through merit rather than politics." Sarah continued, her voice growing more confident as she spoke. "I want him to learn that the people he once dismissed as inferior are actually the backbone of everything we accomplish in the military. Most importantly, I want him to understand that redemption is possible even for someone who has committed unforgivable acts, but only if they're willing to dedicate their lives to making amends." 6 months later, Sarah stood in her dress uniform at the front of a classroom filled with 24 women who represented the first candidates for the military's expanded Special Operations Training Program. Her insignia reflected her restoration to active duty and promotion to the rank of Master Chief Petty Officer, a position that carried both the authority and responsibility she needed to build something meaningful from the tragedy that had brought her to this point. The women in her class came from diverse backgrounds and possessed varying levels of military experience, but they all shared the determination and courage necessary to succeed in a field that had been traditionally dominated by men. At the back of the classroom, wearing the simple uniform of an instructor trainee with no visible rank insignia, stood David Cole. His face showed the weight of the past 6 months. The court-martial that had resulted in his reduction in rank and formal reprimand, the divorce proceedings initiated by his wife, and the ongoing therapy sessions designed to help him understand the psychological factors that had led to his catastrophic failure of leadership. But more importantly, his face showed the beginnings of something that might eventually become wisdom, the hard-earned understanding that true strength came from serving others rather than dominating them. Sarah concluded her opening lecture by reading from a letter that Ben Cole had written to his fiancée just weeks before his death, his words serving as both inspiration and warning to the women who would follow in his footsteps. "Military service is not about proving your worth to people who doubt you," she read, her voice carrying across the silent classroom. "It's about developing the strength and courage necessary to protect people who can't protect themselves, and it's about building something larger and more important than any individual ambition or desire." She looked up from the letter and made eye contact with each candidate, seeing in their faces the same determination that had driven her through her own training years earlier. As the sun set over Fort Bragg, Sarah made her way to the base cemetery, where Ben and his teammates were buried beneath simple white headstones that bore their names, ranks, and dates of service. She placed 3 empty shell casings at the base of Ben's grave, a military tradition that honored fallen warriors and symbolized the final shots fired in their memory. 3 birds took flight from a nearby tree as she stood in silent remembrance, their forms disappearing into the gathering darkness as if carrying messages to places beyond her understanding. Has Major Cole truly learned the meaning of honor? And will Sarah's program create a new generation of warriors who understand that strength comes from service rather than domination? Type redemption. If you believe people can truly change, or revenge if you think Sarah is still planning something. If this story moved you, hit that like button to help others discover it. And if you believe in supporting powerful storytelling that reveals the extraordinary in the ordinary, consider leaving a small donation to help us bring you more incredible true stories like this one. Until next time, remember, you never know who might be walking among you in disguise. See you in the next story.
Thanks for watching BD Stories, where common sense takes a vacation and karma runs the show. Like, comment, and subscribe for your weekly dose of mayhem,